Impressive, and now working for Sloan.ru, and obviously a topic of great interest to all of us. So welcome, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to let you know that I've been writing about media for about 10 years as a journalist, and it's the only area of my interest, so I've been in touch with all journalists, all my friends are journalists, and it's so cool. And while I was here as Kennan Institute Scholar, I was doing research about media after Gorbachev came to power, so in Eurasian media and its history. And I was very interested in decrees which our presidents issued since that time. I was amazed by the number of the decrees which regulate the media sphere in Russia. Even if I knew that there were a lot, I was, when I paid an attention on it, I was amazed by the number of it. So I want to highlight just several types of decrees we have, and several prominent decrees we had in our history. But first of all, I should say that we have laws. There are two main laws which regulate Russian media. It's mass media law, which was signed just 2 days after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the announcement of the Russian Federation as we know it now. And 2 years later, it was a constitution which repeated the main idea of the law, which says that the censorship is prohibited. The Russian mass media law was signed by President Yeltsin, but was written by 3 prominent lawyers who came to power and became famous on the way of democratization. And to be journalists all know them. It's Entin and Baturin, Fedotov, and Vladimir Entin. Vladimir Entin, by the way, was the author of the copyright law as well. Anyway, we have no such traditions as you Americans have to name a law after somebody, but we know those names. So the censorship was prohibited in Article 3 of that law. And the first article said about media which were announced free. The next slide shows us that though there were several limitations of the freedom of the press, and here we have so-called excessive use of media. So you cannot use media for calling to change the constitutional order by force or to proliferate war propaganda. And years after when Putin came to power, in the beginning of 2000s, there were much more prohibitions, amendments included. So you cannot now appeal to terrorist activity or different type of information about counter-terrorism operations. You cannot use propaganda of drugs. So even the law was called the most liberal law in Europe for media. We have such areas. At the same time, we have a lot of other acts which regulate different spheres of media, such as the act about advertisement or the act about selling alcoholic beverages. So there are different types of laws which regulate sphere as well, but these are two main. And at this point, it's very important to see what are the presidential decrees. In the beginning of 90s, Boris Yeltsin signed a special decree in order to provide a constitutional reform. So he allowed to himself to write decrees in different areas, in social life, in political, in economical, while we have no laws of the new country. And since that time, we had a lot of decrees regulated mass media, and it became a tradition. Even the constitutional reform ended. These are my own definitions, the types of the decrees we have. They regulate different areas. So first of all, in the beginning of the 90s, it was media liberalization decrees when it was the ministry, Gosteleradyo, which was divided to several branches, and independent channels were created. Even if they were independent, they were state-owned still. And we'll see it later. There were many decrees which created media outlets by themselves. So the president became the person, and we'll see it later, who just created TV channels, and we have a lot of such examples. And all other activities, such as announcing the state awards. We have a huge amount of awards which are signed by the president, and he grants them to different journalists and media managers. Here is Ostankino Tower. It's the heart of the Russian TV. Ostankino Tower is called after the district which it stays on. And I would like to focus on TV mostly because it's the most prominent area, and it's more controlled and more the most influential in terms of media. So how it was done, media liberalization? It was a decree which came in the middle of 1990. And the main idea of it was to free the broadcasting from the Communist Party. All local governments, political parties, and organizations got access to airways. It was private broadcasting mentioned for the first time, so it would exist. And state broadcasting declared as not a tool for the government. We see two more decrees, for example, when Mikhail Gorbachev is trying to change Gosteleradyo into all Union State Television and Radio Broadcasting Company, which becomes independent, but he appoints the Gosteleradyo director. And then we see when Boris Yeltsin fights, there is a political competition with Yeltsin, with Gorbachev. He announced all union. He announced Ostankino, and then the next step is the next channel, which is called All Russian State Television and Radio Broadcasting Company. So instead of all union. For example, Boris Yeltsin appoints Yegor Yakovlev by himself. Next slide says about appointments. Here are just a few examples of such appointments when the president appointed or dismissed general directors of TV channels himself. Just a few. We have much more. So from the whole history from 1990 until now, so the last decree is about the general director of public TV, and he was appointed by President Putin already, Anatoly. But the channel was created by Dmitry Medvedev at his late months of presidency. You see that Oleg Paptsov was dismissed, and Yeltsin was appointed instead of him, and it's done by decree by President Yeltsin. The same is Mikhail Shutko and Oleg Dobrodeev in 2000. Oleg Vladimir is still the head of Russian state TV and radio company, which includes many TV channels such as Russia 1, Russia 2, Culture, and more than 80 regional channels in the same system. And here is a funny decree which I found about Igor Yakovlev. It never happened again. The president by himself explained why he was dismissed. He says that Igor Yakovlev, that Yeltsin didn't like the coverage about North Ossetian conflict and North Ossetia and the Russian Republic. So the coverage wasn't good, and that's why Yeltsin dismisses Yakovlev. And I want to tell you a little bit more about Igor Yakovlev, who was a prominent journalist and editor, who was the main voice of glasnost policy at Moscow News. So here are several media outlets he was editor-in-chief in, such as Journalistic magazine, Moscow News, Moskovsky Novosti, First Channel Ostankina, and Общий Internet at the end of his life. He was very popular, very famous, and here you can see several pictures from Moskovsky Novosti street. People are trying to find the issues of the paper because it was extremely popular, so they came to the street to read the paper. So at this moment, after the decree, Yakovlev writes a letter to Yeltsin, and it's an open letter which is published in Moscow News. It's amazing. It's just impossible to imagine it now. That somebody would argue with President Putin, for example, publicly and saying that he's not agree with his decision, especially in the media. So Yakovlev wrote, "Just stated in your decree that I was sacked for shortcomings in the organization of work. Those alleged shortcomings were never revealed, registered, or proven in the courts of administrative or judicial investigation, nor were they ever discussed publicly. So I was denied the opportunity to express my own view of the matter. You must certainly realize that what one person sees as a shortcoming and a bias, as did the first secretary of the former North Ossetian Regional Committee, Galazov, is perceived by others as an objective approach and a tribute to the truth." And he says that he is thinking about legal possibilities to argue with the president. He says, "I hereby inform you that I will use every opportunity granted by the Constitution until the presidential decree of 25th of November on Yakovlev is corrected to comply to law." And after this attack, which is amazing, Yeltsin signs another decree about Yakovlev. Oh, you come later. The next slide. This one. So he's dismissed just because he has changed the job. So Yeltsin doesn't say about his bad work. And on a previous slide, I would like to mention that Yakovlev's family became our Russian Sulzbergers. That's his son, Vladimir Yakovlev, who is a prominent journalist as well. He was a founder of Kommersant Daily and Kommersant Publishing House, and it happened in 1989. And Kommersant is still one of the best dailies in Russia. So this role of the family is prominent for Russian journalism. And it's funny, it's just a coincidence that Alexander Yakovlev, advisor of President Gorbachev, who announced glasnost and who was a very liberal person, who try to democratize Russia was also having the same last name, but it's a coincidence. So next slide, please. Here we can see the title of the slide, which is regulation of economical issues. We have different types of decrees when, for example, journalists appeal to the president directly to help them. So it happened in 1992 when so-called liberalization of prices was announced, and people lost all their money. An open market came. So at this time, a lot of newspapers, especially and magazines, print media, lost their readers just because of the money issue. It wasn't possible to subscribe to any media outlets, and it was a huge economical problem for media outlets themselves. So they asked the president to help them, and Boris Yeltsin provided a decree which told about direct subsidies to the newspapers. Almost the same about direct subsidies happened many years later in 2009 when President Medvedev signed a decree about TV channels. He created a list of national channels with a mandatory free access over networks. And there are a lot of other economical issues which amazes me that the president does it by himself, not the parliament, not any other laws, so it comes with decrees. Here we see the other type of decrees, which I would call giving doors to media outlets. Here are some logos, just few logos of different media which were created by decrees. We see Intercultural channel, Moskva, which later became TV Center, ORT, and TV, and even Radio Svoboda, Radio Liberty and American Station. I will talk about it later, it's a fine story. Next slide is about Moscow channel. So it was similar. The Moscow channel, Moskva, and Petersburg channel were branches of Ostankino. They were created as independent in the beginning of the 90s, and you can see that the president declares even the owners of the channels, which was Moscow City Hall, and in next slide, in center, in Petersburg channel, it was St. Petersburg City Hall. And the government of Leningradской области, for example, as well. So there were appointments of those directors as well. And here we see the NTV, which is one of the best TV companies of the middle of 90s, and has a huge history, and one of the best examples of what happened with media. So it started to broadcast in 1993, but it had no license yet, and they bought some time in agreement with the fifth channel, the Petersburg's one. So they broadcasted several programs which were news and analytical programs. The same year, Yeltsin signs a decree which says about experiment. In order to experiment, he creates an opportunity for the channel to broadcast on the Российские университеты, Russian university channel. They have a right to broadcast 58 hours weekly after 6 p.m. daily, so the prime time is theirs. Here is the picture of NTV creators, founders. several years passed, and 1996 comes, and NTV takes a huge part in its campaign when Boris Yeltsin, extremely sick and extremely unpopular president, decides to participate in the elections. His opponent is Nezavisimaya Gazeta, and media are very biased in order to support Yeltsin. And we all know now that it was a February Davos conference when Russian tycoons agreed with each other to support Yeltsin, when they listened to Kennan Institute at this point, and they did it publicly. They wrote, for example, an open letter which was published in Correspondent, and their media supported Yeltsin as well. So in case of NTV, its general director, Igor Milashenko, becomes one of the main strategists of Yeltsin's campaign. And here we see amazing pictures from this time. Here's just two tables, and the next slide shows another one, which says about Yeltsin's support in the beginning of the year and just half a year later. And you see that there are some intentions which are 10 times more to support Yeltsin. Here we see the list of party supporters and their intentions to vote for Yeltsin in the beginning of the year and at the middle of the year when the election came. The next slide shows the choice. People were asked what would they do, whom they would prefer with the choice between Zyuganov and Yeltsin, and you see it from January until June how the number of people grew. These are polls by Novaya Center. Yuri Levada was one of the best-known sociologists in Russia. And this campaign he explained as political mobilization. He said that it wasn't a political competition, it was a political mobilization. So Yeltsin was supported, he won. And here are people who made his victory as well. And what is funny that this year, then President of Russia, Medvedev, was meeting with oppositional leaders. And he told, the quote, unlikely, there are some people who have doubts about the person who won the election in 1996. It wasn't Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin. So it's hard to imagine that the president by himself told that actually they were frauds and Zyuganov won. That's what he meant. But Yeltsin didn't win the elections. But here, the team of people who won, and after several months, it was an inauguration on 9th of August, and 1 month after it, Yeltsin's decree came, which allowed NTV channel to broadcast 24 hours on the same TV frequency. He invited Igor Milashenko to become a chief of his administration at this time, but Milashenko refused. And Yeltsin signed an official grateful letter for him for the help during the campaign. So when NTV began to criticize authorities, President Yeltsin, a lot of people were discussing it, reminding them that they were allowed to broadcast freely without any payment for it, and they should. So there were opponents who thought they shouldn't do so, they shouldn't criticize the president because he granted them a TV channel. And Radio Liberty is a funny story. It was illegal in the Soviet Union, as you probably know, but a lot of people who were interested in politics anyway tried to listen to it, to so-called enemy's voice. And after the coup of 1991, when Radio Liberty was one of the voices which told objective news, broadcasted objective news about the coup, Yeltsin remembered it. So it was one guy. He was 29 years old at this time. His name is Mikhail Sokolov. And he recollected those memories in an interview to Sloan. I talked to him a few weeks ago about decree. He was the one who actually wrote this decree, and that's how he recollects it. After the victory over the coup, I had some sleep, wandered into the parliament, and suddenly I thought that there was a need to bring a Radio Liberty issue to a close. A radio correspondent, Saik Schuster, wanted to visit Moscow, but the Soviet border was closed for him. Suddenly at the parliament, Sergei Shakhay, a legal issues assistant of Yeltsin, passed by me. Listen, I told him, is it possible to issue any document to allow Radio Liberty to broadcast in a normal way? To issue a decree, he said. And who will write it? You do. Well, I had never written any decrees before, and actually had no chance to do so later. I sat by the table in the same evening and realized that it wasn't that hard. After writing the draft, I called to Andrei Gavitsky, and he told me it was genius. So he collected several visas from some authorities, and actually he said that it wasn't rewritten somehow, just some punctuation, a few words, and Yeltsin signed it at the end of August of 1991. When Putin came to power, it was his own decree about Radio Liberty as well. So he said that Radio Liberty cannot broadcast as it happened before. And I was looking for the official explanations of it, and found that they were saying about rules, that the rules has changed, and it should be a legal opportunity to everybody, every broadcaster to have the same rights. So it was an explanation for signing this one. The last decree which announced the creation of a TV channel was a decree written by Medvedev about public television, and it happened on 17th of April, just at the end of his presidency. The decree postulates, among others, several things, those ones, that it should be created as an NGO. The chairman is appointed and dismissed by the president. That public chamber of the Russian Federation should create a channel public council or community board in another translation, and the president should approve it. That the Ministry of Defense, which owns the Swiss TV channel, should suggest the ways to offer those frequencies, this distribution network for the public channel. So there are just a lot of economical issues, and what is interesting for me is that I know that here in this country, public TV was created by the Congress, which hasn't happened with us. So it was Dmitry Medvedev who signed the decree about public television, and President Yeltsin who appointed Natalia. And here, the funny thing about awards. I copied it from the Kremlin website. There are 25 decrees just about TV center, channel TV center, or TVC it was quoted in different times in different ways. So there are 25 decrees about announcement of awards to its workers. So it's really hard to count the number of journalists which got decrees, and sometimes I joke that it's even easier to name journalists who didn't get the presidential award. It might be a good topic of research, I believe, why people get it, for what reason. But I would say that the awards are different. It can be a medal, an order, an official presidential gratefulness, honorary certificate, several official titles, such as Honored Worker of Culture of the Russian Federation, or Honored Worker of Communications, and even TV persons can get it. It happened, for example, last June when Oleg Dobrodev, General Director of УГТРК, General Director of Cultura Culture Channel, Sergei Shumakov, and TV anchor Sviatoslav got such honorary degree of the Russian Federation State Award, and they were named laureates in literature and art. So I would say as well that it can be personal. We see, for example, Alexei Pushkov's decree. He is named on the title of decree. It can be in a small group, done in a small group of several TV programs or TV channel workers. Or it can be a huge amount of people who get awards. And it happened at least 3 times when about 200 people got awards. And the next slide shows us how it happens. It was 75th anniversary of Russian TV when several decrees were signed and a lot of TV workers got such awards from the president directly. It was Putin at this time, and 5 years later it was Medvedev. And here we see Nikolai Drozdov, a popular anchor who has a program about nature, animals, who got this award as well. I put those 3 pictures which are not from the Decrees Award, but I would say that there are a lot of other awards given by the government directly. So it's a governmental annual award in the print media area. And here we see the last one, which happened in the beginning of 2012, and Putin was the prime minister this time. So he came to congratulate several people, and among them was Mikhail Beketov, who is sitting on the picture, who was hardly beaten in Khimki, who lost his voice, he cannot speak now, and he is in a terrible condition. So he needed some money for treatment, medical treatment in Israel, and award was about $1 million rubles, I believe, $33,000. So it was sort of very cynical to grant him such a award, but he came to get it. And there were several other positional journalists as well. By the Fedotov is Irina Petrovskaya, who writes for Novaya Gazeta now, a TV critic, one of the best-known TV critics, who opposes Putin. So she came to get this award as well. Sergei Parkhomenko, who was announced as well, didn't come. He said that it wasn't his personal award. He got it as a editor-in-chief of Вокруг Света magazine. It's sort of nature magazine. So he didn't come to it. So there were a lot of discussions: should they come or should they note what they should do? Should they discuss press situation with Putin, or should they ignore it? So everybody made their decisions, but this year was very unusual because usually we see that awards, usually these are people who work for state TV channels, for example. And here we saw several professional journalists. So that's it. I don't know if you have any conclusions. I think it's really clear that it's hard to be free in the situation when the president by himself directly regulates the life as a journalist. There are a lot of different aspects of press freedom in Russia, but I wanted to show this one, which talks by itself.
Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting, very informative. Could you say just something about the kind of informal rules and lists that I know exist for people who cannot in fact appear on different TV shows? Maybe they could appear 5 years ago, they can't now. How does that whole system work?
I was trying to, I wrote about it, but I was trying to speak about it with many TV anchors. They didn't want to be mentioned. And mostly they told that you understand it yourself. So it's the matter of self-censorship. You would never invite Garry Kasparov because you know that Kasparov is a prominent oppositional leader. So the system understands itself. So it's became. I believe that it became more problem in modern Russia that journalists understand themselves, even they are not asked to. But at the same time, it was another case when I wrote about the first channel inside documents. It was so-called Analytическая дирекция, analytical department of the first channel, which was created by Marat Gelman. At this time, he was the head of it. And it was a long time ago, but before the elections. So Gelman was dealing with the Electoral Commission by himself. And he told that he told me that it was him who wrote those special documents. It's so-called analytical view on the upcoming events of the week, when there are people suggested to call, when there are topics suggested to cover, and where some people are not pleased to comment on anything. And the same issue is that Vladimir Pozner,
I was just going to ask him.
yes, he declared it publicly, but I'm sure that he has no such list, so it may not exist. This list is in the minds of people. But what is funny with Pozner is that he told once that there are 3 people whom he shouldn't invite, and it's okay with him because he wouldn't invite them anyway. And he said, but if it will be 5 people, then I will think about it. Several years passed, and
years, doesn't it? Sounds like Pozner.
Several years passed, and Pozner said that there is a list of 5 people, and it's okay with him because they're extremists, and he wouldn't.
But if there were 10,
then yeah. So it's amazing. And I asked once, for example, it was a conference for regional journalists, and Pozner came to it. And I asked him why he doesn't cover, for example, an issue with Vasily Alexanyan, who is a lawyer for Yukos, who was in prison at this time. and it was such a human rights abuse. He was extremely sick. He had AIDS and hepatitis, and he had no medical treatment at this time. He was put in prison, and nobody was trying to catch him out. So Posner said that it's the war of the state with he does realize it, that it's extremely unhuman, but it was it's a war between Khodorkovsky and Putin, so he cannot interfere.
Well, yeah, I mean, Posner, whatever you think of him, you have to admire him, because for what, 40, 50 years, right, he's managed to steer this line.
Survival.
He's a real survivalist. Okay, other questions, comments? Sorry.
Actually, on Posner, I just saw an announcement that he and Donahue are going to do this gig for the Eurasian. And you know, I remember those telebridges where Posner just really slammed the Soviet participants to make sure they said the right thing. Back in the Gorbachev era. But sorry, the question I've got for you is a little bit off your topic, but one of my former students is finishing up a doctorate at Oxford now, comparing the media in China and Russia. And one of the interesting things is that China has a lot more censorship, but a lot of the media are doing well economically, both broadcast and print. And I'm wondering if there are any examples recently of Russian media that are doing well commercially, that are actually making money, as opposed to getting, you know, Putin reaffirmed the subsidies a few years ago. The crisis probably made things worse. But are any of the either television or print outlets being economic success stories in Russia?
Yeah, they do. They have TV channels are extremely. They're doing extremely good. And what is amazing that they get subsidies from the state, and they are the same market competitors with private TV channels. So they have two sources of income, from the government budget and from commercial advertisement market. And ORT, for example, which is the first channel now, had a loan from Bank in 1998 or 1999. It was $100 million at this time. And as far as I know, I might be mistaken, but I haven't heard about it. They didn't pay it back yet. And at the same time, NTV channel, which had problems with the government, was charged for the much less loan from the bank, and the general director was changed, and you probably remember the story of 2001 and all that happened with NTV. So it's not a fair rule. Somebody is allowed to do some stuff. But regarding economical issues, there are Kommersant, I believe, is in a very good condition, mostly because of supplements, Ведомости and the independent media as a media holding is doing good. But they have a lot of glossy magazines. But Ведомости, I believe, have their own profits. They don't show it publicly, but they say they have it. And what is funny, I remember that Boris Berezovsky once, when he was the owner of Kommersant, got their profit. So Kommersant paid to Berezovsky, and they were extremely humiliated by it. So they thought they would, they earned some money which they could invest in their activities to make the Kommersant better, but he took the money.
Any other questions, comments?
Yeah. Just say a little bit about the use of lawsuits against journalists for their political speech or some critical speech?
There are so many ways to silence journalists, and especially in regions. It happens all the time, and we have slander article back, which gives, which has an opportunity to send a journalist to prison for slander. It was decriminalized during this article during Medvedev's presidency, and when Putin came back, he brought it back. There are a lot of suits, but as well, there are some suits which were real, I believe, because journalism corruption is huge as well. So it's not just the government which suppresses journalists. Sometimes they behave extremely bad as well. And there were several famous cases which happened to Yulia Pelihova, for example, or Aleklia, or somebody else. It was so-called jinsar, or buying silence. So they would, it was in Nezavisimaya Gazeta as well. The journalists came to the advisor of Agriculture Minister and offered that he wouldn't publish some materials for $30,000. And he was sent to for 8 years in prison.
I was curious, you mentioned how TV was the most influential and therefore most regulated film industry. I was interested how that compares to sort of other media outlets, in particular online and sort of the blogosphere.
Oh, it's the most free area. We still have no, we have had no law about the internet for a long time. And regulation came just this year when all those dragon laws were signed by President Putin, and a lot of people believe in order to do anything with the protest movement. So internet was touched just this year. It's the most independent area, and there are a lot of concerns about it now. There are talks about YouTube or Facebook, which might be prohibited, but it's not clear yet. But in some ways, there are some secret services for sure have their own job to do, and they do it. I don't know how to translate it. SORM. It's a system which finds particular words and sorts it, and you can follow emails, personal stuff, if secret services found such type of words. But anyway, the internet is still the most independent.
I had a question that is more cultural. You mentioned that there it was a decree with propaganda against drugs or psychotropic substances being forbidden. How does that work in practice? I can think that pop songs might come under this. There could be a lot of innuendo, metaphor. Has this actually been enforced at all?
I don't remember about such cases, but it doesn't mean that they don't exist.
In other words, this could be.
It could be, yeah, it could be.
So there are decrees in here that are sort of waiting to happen. There are ways that they could be more tight.
I think it should be somewhere in criminal code. It might be in criminal code or in the law, for example, prohibiting this which talks about drug use, for example.
Right.
So it can be something additional to the decree, I believe.
Right. And in the same way, I mean, and more serious, this issue of going after people who advocate violence. There's the border of how you prosecute terrorists.
It's the main problem.
And I'm wondering whether there's some very celebrated cases, including maybe ones that we haven't been as aware of and we need to be aware of, where this has been a factor. The advocating of violence as a way to get after someone.
It is used in the case of extremist activities, for example, because you can become an extremist for everything. It's such a broad definition.
Sure.
That even criticizing the parliament or the government can be called extremist. But particular cases. I remember the case, even if it's not extremist, but how it works in general. The case when the blogger was had a trial in the court, and he got a prison sentence for naming militia. At this time it was militia. Some militiamen, policemen, so he was just swearing in case of militia, and he was sent to prison for it. And in the court decision, it was that he used a social class hatred.
Yes.
So militia is a social class.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. What?
I have actually two things. One is a comment and the second is a question. I just read an article from Izvestia that Deputy Mitrofanov passed an initiative that now he wants everybody to sign in social networks using their passport data. It's just a comment. It's crazy, it's just a comment. And the question is, I know that now there is a big rise of Russian Church. It's like power, those who are in power are really interested in getting some national idea connected with this Orthodox Christianity. And do you think, will it influence somehow the freedom of speech, this idea of power that we need to be like Christians, Orthodox? How do you think will it be?
Yeah, I'm scared about it. Some critics say that we are becoming an orthodox era.
Orthodox era.
It seems so. It's scary that yesterday's Bolsheviks now has a lot of now use a lot of propaganda in favor of Christ, and it's just. I just can't explain how much I am concerned about it. It became a new ideology instead of Bolshevism, I believe. It's becoming, and they are trying to put it instead of old ideas with the same force, with the same expressions. It's funny, for example, at Snob magazine, Snob website, Valery Panyushkin. A very good journalist known from Kommersant, who had a lot of brilliant articles, wrote a huge article with 15 questions to non-Christians. And the main idea of the whole text was, how do you survive, guys? What do you do while you are atheists? So I thought this morning, and put it on Facebook, that the evolution of Panyushkin's heroes is such. Boris Yeltsin, 1996, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the middle of 2000s, Jesus Christ 2012. It's funny, but it's not at the same way, because it becomes an enormous, and it brings an enormous role to religion, which I believe should be separated from the state and from the media.
But it is technically anyway, right? Constitutionally.
Yeah.
Details.
Details. Questions, comments? Maybe that feeds back also with the question that Margie was asking. So when you come back to these, things that you're not supposed to do, drug propaganda, but then things like pornography, right? I mean, again, how do you define that? And then that could also link back into some of the orthodox ideology and be used as an excuse to clamp down.
It was
Yeah.
an issue with pornography in the middle of 90s. It came to the law as a type of information you cannot use, but there was no definition. And every time Duma, the Russian parliament, was going to discuss it, everybody made fun on it, so they stopped to do. And there were several just stupid definitions which some deputies had. They tried to put it in the law, but they were just very funny discussions. So I don't know if it exists. I don't remember if it exists now, the definition of pornography.
We've had similar discussions in the United States, even in the Supreme Court, right? So
yeah, but it's interesting that it was written in the law, but had no definition. So if you do so, what's the punishment? Sometimes it's just prohibited, and there is no punishment. It's prohibited, and that's it.
Any other questions, comments? Well, I think this is obviously very important research, and I wish you luck with it. And you're going back to Russia next month, right? So you'll go back and write this law. Thank you very much.
Thank you.